Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Timothy Dargini, and I am a senior associate in Mayor Brown's Global Mobility and Migration practice. It's my honor to have the opportunity to introduce the next event in Mayor Brown's virtual Pride Parade with a long-term champion, I believe, of mine and other kids who were LGBT growing up, the It Gets Better project. Having spent really the last 10 years of my life supporting this cause with a dear friend of mine, Scott Zumwalt. I've always believed that the It Gets Better project, like I said, champions LGBT kids, and I am so glad to be here with other champions for LGBT kids. Like the chairman of our law firm, Mayor Brown, Paul Theiss, and the chief legal officer of a great client of ours, American Express, in Laureen Seeger. Paul, do you want to say a few hellos?
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and welcome to the hundreds who have dialed in for this exciting presentation. We're really excited to partner with the It Gets Better project to have really a lively and exciting conversation. As Tim said, my name is Paul Theiss, and it's my privilege to be the chair of Mayor Brown. I think my role here, or my life story here, is the least exciting of the presenters for sure in this project. But just the same, I do want to thank our D&I team for putting this together, and Tim for coming up with the idea of having a virtual Pride Parade in this time when we can't have real parades. Mayor Brown, as many of you know, has a long and rich tradition of meaningful pro bono work, and I grew up as a Mayor Brown lawyer and have never worked anywhere else, and it's always been a part of my DNA, and I've borne witness to a lot of great work on behalf of LGBTQ individuals, both within Mayor Brown and outside the walls of Mayor Brown in the community, including taking on successfully the Defense of Marriage Act and our involvement in the Obergefell ruling and other really important legal initiatives to advance the rights of LGBTQ plus individuals. I am really excited to hear the conversation. I'll be back later to chime in, no doubt, but for now, I want to turn it over to our good friend Laureen Seeger with American Express. And Laureen can say hi also. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Tim. I'm very delighted and honored to join today, and I want to thank Mayor Brown. I've been an ally of the community for decades and have loved using my position as Chief Legal Officer to advocate within two corporations, first McKesson, now American Express, on behalf of the members of the LGBTQ community, A year ago, I was at the Global World Pride Parade based in New York City, dancing to Lizzo in Times Square at a concert American Express hosted. Never thought so much would change in a year. I can say that this community that we're honoring today has given me more back than I think I've been able to give it. And along the lines of things that have changed in the last year, my daughter, Grace, came out as bisexual this year. And my 62-year-old brother, one of 9 siblings, came out as gay in the last 6 months. And this community has been incredibly supportive of him. And so, yes, it's been an interesting year, and I'm really glad that I've had the community around me to help through those changes.
Well, Laureen, thank you. And also thank you to your incredible colleagues in champions like Richard Quinones, Jason Brown, and some lovely, lovely colleagues in Daron Berry and Aaron McConnell who have helped organize today's event. You know, I think at this point, really, I'd love to turn it over to Justin for the reason why we're all really here, which is to hear stories from Julie and from Uma, just 2 wonderful advocates and activists for the LGBTQ community. Justin?
Thank you, Timothy, and thank you as well, Paul and Laureen, for sharing those personal stories. I'm so excited to have your family members, Laureen, part of the community. They are loved and they are welcomed. I am the Director of Education and Global Programming at the It Gets Better Project. It has been my privilege to be with the organization for 6 of its 10 years. We're actually almost about to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the organization this September. We've accomplished a lot in 10 years, but I will go ahead and in the vein of the work that we do, we are a storytelling organization. I will let a video kind of tell that story for me.
It gets better.
You are not alone.
And so I can now say that I'm queer and proud.
Those things that people tease me about, they are absolutely true. And they're what make me fabulous and amazing.
There are so many people out there that want to love and support you. So just look for that community. You can find people. It's going to be okay.
I promise that it gets better. I know because I am you.
To see a viral campaign promoted and covered on MTV was really meaningful. It helped me get into LGBT activism.
Working with It Gets Better made me feel so confident. It made me feel like I had allies, and thank everybody who has ever made an It Gets Better video, because you have made a difference in somebody's life.
It Gets Better inspires all young people to accept themselves. It has helped countless insecure boys and girls become confident men and women.
These moments, if you allow them to, can strengthen your character and strengthen who you are as a person.
It's important for us to tell our stories and to be vocal, because this is how we affect the community.
To tell me I'm worthy anymore. We know we're worthy.
How can you possibly not be right if this is who you are? And someday, people are going to see that. You have to know that.
In the decade that we have been doing this incredible work, we have been able to collect over 70,000 video stories, all aimed at uplifting, empowering, and connecting LGBTQ youth. As a collection, it represents the largest effort, storytelling effort of that vein to exist in, anywhere and at any time in the world. And it is such an honor to do this great work. It's also an honor to bring great stories to the forefront from time to time, which is what I get to do today with Uma and Julie. I'm going to introduce both of them very, very quickly, and then we will jump into some questions for them. I'm here mainly as a facilitator, just to help guide the conversation. But I would love for you to get to know Uma and Julie. Uma is one of our official youth voices of Pride 2020 here at the It Gets Better Project. After noticing the absence of LGBTQ+ representation in education and policy spaces, Uma founded MoCo Pride, a nonprofit dedicated to giving LGBTQ students a voice in Maryland's political and educational systems. The organization lobbied successfully for the creation of the United States' first standardized LGBTQ+ studies class for high schoolers. Uma is now a student writer for the course's curriculum. As a biracial South Asian American, Uma cares deeply about global human rights and intersectional LGBTQ+ education. In the future, Uma hopes to fight for LGBTQ+, Indigenous, and ethnic justice as a human rights lawyer herself. And she's only 16. Uma, welcome to the call.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be part of this effort and to be here partnering with Mayor Brown on this project.
Thank you. And Julie is a diversity and inclusion speaker, a corporate trainer, leadership coach, LGBTQ+ advocate, and author of the memoir, My Son Wears Heels, One Mom's Journey from Clueless to Kick-Ass. She's a former board member for the It Gets Better Project and presently serves on the board of PFLAG NYC. Huffington Post named her a favorite queer hero of 2016. A longtime resident of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Julie now lives in Brooklyn, New York. When not presenting, she is often found cheering in the audience at her creative director and sometimes drag artist child Harry's performances. Thank you for being here, Julie.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you to everyone else on this panel for creating space for this really important conversation. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my story, which goes back 28 years. I'm not going to tell it all, I'm going to try and condense it, but my gender journey really began in 1992 when my child Harry was 2 years old, and one night asked me how I knew he was a boy. And the question sort of threw me, but you know, kids ask questions. So I gave him a very brief anatomy lesson, which I kind of cringe as I tell you that now because I would never explain it to him the way that I did then. But I was also curious as to why he asked the question. And when I asked him, he just replied very matter-of-factly, inside my head, I'm a girl. And I had trouble to honestly even processing his response. And I remember so many times as Harry was growing up, how often I felt confused or worried or fearful. I didn't know if I could be a good mom to this kid who didn't seem to fit into the pink or blue box that society expected all kids to fit into. And the internet was no help to me because the internet didn't exist. Terms like gender creative, gender fluid, gender nonconforming didn't exist either. But what did exist was a lot of misinformation, a lot of stereotyping, and a lot of judgment, especially for a mom who had an effeminate boy. It meant that I was somehow doing something wrong to my kid. So Harry, at 2 years old and onward, became my most enlightened teacher. And I learned to rely on my instincts, to listen really carefully, to keep an open mind. And Harry's dad and I decided that as long as he was happy, that we would let him lead the way. And at the same time, I started to really think about and question this idea of society's expectations for boys and girls, that they needed to fit into these boxes of pink or blue. And I won't deny that there have been some speed bumps along the way. I think one of the most dramatic for me and for Harry was at 10 years old, some of the bullies at school who used to tease and taunt him for just his gender expression. He had long hair, he wore beads, lots of bright colors and tie-dye, and they had this perception that Harry was gay at 10 years old. And one day they took their taunting and their teasing from the playground into the classroom. And I learned after school one day that these kids had sharpened their pencils and were stabbing Harry in the back in class when the teacher wasn't looking. That ended well. I'll tell you that the chapter in my book is called 4 Bullies Suspended, but it was really the time that Harry became exposed to this idea that he wasn't, that in the eyes of other people and other kids, that he wasn't okay. There was something wrong with him. There was something to be teased and made fun of. And then in high school, Harry was a foreign exchange student at the age of 15. I thought it was too young, but he wanted to do it at 15. And he went to Spain, and it's a long story of how he ended up in a Catholic school, of all places. But some of the kids learned that Harry was gay because he told me he wasn't going to necessarily tell people, but if someone asked him, he wasn't going to lie about who he was. And then the mother superior called Harry into his office, into her office, and proceeded to tell them that he should be seeing a psychiatrist and that they weren't going to be able to keep him there at school, that parents of other kids were complaining and they didn't want their child in school with a homosexual. And that was so devastating for me, being so many thousands of miles away and not being able to be there for my kid. And that was the first time that Harry experienced a person in authority, an adult in authority, not accepting him and supporting him. And now that Harry's a millennial, the discrimination he faces is just every day. It can be every day. I was with him on the train after going to see the Alexander McQueen show at the Metropolitan Museum. And Harry wears a beard, but he also wears earrings and jewelry, other jewelry, and long skirts and heels if he feels like it. And we were on the train when some man got on and sat down and then took one look at Harry and pulled out a box cutter on the train. Well, I was there. I was just paralyzed. I wanted to pull the, emergency stop the train, but I had no idea what would happen. He finally got off, and I was a wreck. Harry was fine. He, from Harry's point of view, this is New York, Mom. People are crazy. But Harry's an adult now, and it's really what led me to the role that I have now, which is helping organizations create more inclusive environments, because I want kids like mine and others to be able to see themselves at work and be able to contribute and thrive in the workplace. And among those kids, I count Uma, because as remarkable as she is, she still has, ways to go into the workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for telling that powerful story. And yes, I definitely do have quite a ways to go. And I think in a lot of ways, I have a story not of equal length in terms of time, but in terms of the LGBTQ plus kids I've had the pleasure to interact with, who even just within my community have faced such diverse experiences of both struggle and resilience. I really founded my nonprofit because I saw how many kids came to me saying, I might become homeless if I tell my parents this, and I know that my counselor will not help me if that happens. Or who were repeatedly told by officials in schools that this would hurt the school culture, or that this would be something that would not add to their own mental health, or that they were already predisposed for mental health issues as a way to detract from their own LGBTQ plus experience. And what we kept seeing with that was still that even though we saw these glaring inequities, they were not being addressed at a policy level. It's not common to listen to youth in politics, and it's even less common to listen to LGBTQ youth in politics, even though they're probably one of the voices that needs to be heard the most right now in terms of inaccess, in terms of inequality, especially for LGBTQ plus youth of color. And so your story reminds me of just so many times where I've seen the disenfranchisement that youth have had, the violence that so many kids have experienced, and also when they don't have a supportive parent at hand, and what can happen and how that can have an even more compounded impact on their lives.
Let me hop in there for a second.
Yeah,
of course. Oh, go ahead, Julie. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I know in working as a volunteer within schools that there are kids who, it's sort of a third. Like there are a third of kids who are accepted 100% by their parents and their family. There's another third that are rejected and not accepted at all. And then there's a third of kids who just haven't come out yet because they're not sure about how it'll be received.
Yeah. And I think for me, that's really interesting because I really thought I was not going to be a kid who would be accepted. I mean, I grew up partially in the South Asian immigrant community in the US that's not very open about LGBTQ plus experiences. It wasn't really thought of something where you could be both South Asian and queer. It was one or the other, honestly. And so seeing that and kind of understanding that, I had a preconceived notion of exclusion. And then when I did come out to my parents and they were like, okay, that was kind of the biggest shock. And it was a great shock to have, but often we really don't think that it's going to happen because we often see parents as unsupportive.
Yeah, I think
How is
that's
that?
so. Go ahead,
I'm so
Justin.
sorry, Julie. There must be a delay, so I keep interrupting. I was just going to add to that about how do you both see that situation of isolation, of dealing with these challenges during a time when kids are isolated at home with their families, they are cut off from their friends, they don't have access to the communities, the immigrant communities that they once had support from.
Yeah, I think it has such a big impact of isolation. I know that my organization has started running weekly virtual events just to get kids together because they've lost a safe space that school could be. And so although school can be a place often of discrimination and bullying, it can also be a place where you meet other LGBTQ plus youth. And so now in this kind of isolated space, especially for transgender youth who might be having their services for transitioning delayed or having surgeries delayed or not have access to necessary products, I think what we see is an even greater need for mental health support and for safe spaces. Even something that we did, like watching a movie about an LGBTQ plus figure, got so many youth to come just because it was an opportunity to unwind together. And normally that would be something casual during the school day, but now it needs to be so much more structured and so much more emphasized just because of our situation.
Yeah, I think that's so true because school, as you said, even though it may not always be the safest place, you know, there's one friend or there's one guidance counselor or there's one teacher or there's someone with whom they can find support and talk to. And my fear is that so many kids without the refuge of school may be trapped in a family that isn't accepting or isn't loving of who they are 100%. I mean, I know there's one child who was so eager for her GSA to do some kind of extracurricular, but she was worried because her mom was always checking her phone and she didn't feel safe. Even in
and I think
online.
Yeah, and it's also, it really is something where there's it's like many things in advocacy, like many aspects of life, it is compounded, where it's a privilege to be able to even have an individual space at home, to have a computer that's not shared. And there's still so much technology and access in our country and in the world that we often don't even see that right now. And so it really, already it's a privilege to be out to your parents, and then it's even a further privilege to be out and have access to other safe spaces online right now.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of kids too who had jobs, who were hoping to have a summer job, and because they worked in so many, you know, hospitality or restaurant jobs, that those have disappeared for them too. So this idea of being isolated and the impact of loneliness. I mean, I'm sure when you've heard about, you know, the loneliness, how that is processed or how that develops and what the outcomes of it are.
Definitely. And I think already right now, being a kid, it sucks to not see your friends. It sucks to be part of class of 2020 that didn't have a graduation. Online school is not my favorite thing. It's far from it. And I think just being gay and being in this extra place of loneliness, or this extra kind of space where you're waiting for the next thing, whether it's the next aspect of your transition surgery, the next opportunity to feel safe, just is added to that experience.
Right, not being able to go to a doctor, or go to a healthcare facility that might be able to help you. Absolutely. I think one of the things in your question, Justin, about stress, and, you know, the teenagers are stressed anyway. I mean, school shootings is probably at the top of the, you know, high school or any kid stress list. But then, you know, even for non-LGBTQ kids, their stresses are things like exams and class or applying for college. And, you know, that's sort of that percent, that's like 22% of non-LGBT kids are worried about that. And when it comes to LGBTQ plus kids, their biggest concerns are not being accepted by their family. It's like 26%. Then being bullied in school, feeling pressure to come out, not knowing how to navigate that process. And the thing that non-LGBTQ kids are concerned about, like the classes and the exams and grades, that's like less than 10% of what LGBTQ kids are worried about. You know, I feel like it's probably so compounded.
Yeah. And I think, especially now, there is data coming out about the fact that there is what's called in
an online world.
Yeah. I think there's even more data coming out now also about the existence of an LGBTQ
so how
achievement
are
gap.
kids, have you found, how are you finding kids navigating the space?
I think, can you hear me? Sorry. I think
yes.
It's so, sorry, I keep checking my earbuds to make sure they're still on and loaded, but yes, I think it's interesting experience. I think kids aren't happy to be online. Like you said, we're missing out on so much, and already in the country, there is what's called an LGBTQ achievement gap, because we see that because of bullying, because you have to prioritize your own survival over getting good grades or over doing well in that test. There already is a gap between the educational performance of LGBTQ plus youth and heterosexual or cisgender youth. And that's something that's further exacerbated by resource access and opportunity and access that is also a huge issue in communities of color and in under-resourced communities in the US. And so these different things are already making it difficult to achieve. And then being online, not feeling safe, having to share devices, et cetera, is just adding to that. And so a lot of kids weren't in a good space before this, and they're not coming out of it, no pun intended, in an even better space than before.
A question actually just came in from somebody who's watching from Mayor Brown, who I think this is directed towards you, Julie, that you accepted your son, but what about other family members? How did they come to accept Harry and understand and embrace his identity, or did they face challenges? Or other close intimates of the family?
How did who face challenges? Did Harry?
Other family members, other close intimates, kind of
Harry
of the
was
family.
Really there were LGB members of our family. Harry's uncles, some cousins, you know, we have gay friends. So it was just natural that we were going to accept Harry. But there wasn't this idea of, you know, gender expression wasn't really understood. The idea of gender identity, you know, which I have to admit, I wasn't even all that familiar with the idea of gender identity versus sexual orientation myself until several years ago. And so, you know, there were people that just didn't understand, or would think Harry was just in drag. You know, if Harry was wearing earrings, oh, Harry's in drag, you know, not really understanding the idea of expression. So navigating that was a little challenging. I mean, my sister, who's an adult, at Thanksgiving last year, Harry wearing a necklace and Harry had eye makeup on. And I didn't know Harry dressed in drag all the time. You know, not realizing that drag is Harry's performance art, but that Harry's expression generally was just to be able to wear whatever clothes he wanted, that there was no difference of gender in clothing. So, you know, hopefully everyone watching is a lifelong learner and knows that there is a lot to learn about people's expression and gender and how it can just enhance a family.
Yeah, I think that really just reminds me of my own experience.
Did that answer the question, do you think?
Yeah, I think that really reminds me of my own experience with this, and how, for me, in my family, it really has been about education. And one of the best things you can do if you have LGBTQ plus youth in your life is listen. Listen to what they want to be called. Do your research, ask them for resources. We love to give them. the big thing for me right now is trying to get my parents to understand that gender non-binary is not the same as calling someone a they. It's not meant out of malice. It's not meant out of any issue. It's just what people have been socialized to hear. The same thing that when I initially came out to some of my extended family, my grandmother told me that's fine. I appreciate deviant sexualities, which looking back in retrospect may not have been a great way to put it, but it wasn't meant out of a place of malice. And so always remembering that and always remembering kind of trying to convey your intentions, but also make sure that you're listening and you're listening to what they want to be called, what they want to be addressed as, and what they need is one of the most powerful things, I think.
How do you think, Uma, how families and school communities, how could they maybe work together better, right, to create this kind of holistic or holistic approach or holistic strategy to serving the youth that they care for?
I think one of the number one things, especially coming from a background of being someone who's a second generation American in a community that values education, going to school, hearing the school's words was always something that was considered very effective. And so schools sending out information about it's okay to be LGBTQ+ and educating parents can be something that's really well regarded, and it can be legitimatizing. I think if your teenager often comes to you and is like, oh, I read this thing on Google, I'd like to be called that, it's going to have a very different kind of perspective because of how people are oriented around knowledge than the school came back with this paper, or the school gave us all this flyer, or the school is holding a training, or PTA is holding a training. And so sometimes having the education from the school or from the school's organizations can be a really effective way to engage diverse communities in LGBTQ+ acceptance.
What about the other way around? How do you think families can inform schools and get them to where they need to be to better accept all LGBTQ+ students?
Well, I think first and foremost, I think parents need to be advocates a lot if they have the ability to do so. I think one of the number one things is that schools and really school districts need to spend more money on therapists and school psychologists and counselors. At the high school level, most of the time counselors are there for minor issues and for college registration or for getting your transcript, et cetera, and they're not necessarily there to help with problems. I know at the school I go to, which is considered one of the best districts in the country, our school shares a psychologist once a week with 4 other schools. And we have kids every day who might have crises at home or might have other needs. And so being an advocate for better mental health access is going to help everyone, but especially LGBTQ+ youth. I also think asking questions and advocating to schools and to school districts to make paperwork around being LGBTQ+ and having kids get education about knowing their rights. I think that's super important, is having education and understanding of what LGBTQ+ youth are entitled to, especially around issues like name change or bathroom access, et cetera, where the paperwork to do those things can be so complex for anyone. Even for families, it's not often translated into other languages. And so one of the best things to also see be parents advocating for simpler to understand, more effective, and easier to understand materials around being LGBTQ+, and also around helping their child live their fullest.
Good point. I mean, I was just going to add that, this idea, and we're in New York City now. Harry didn't grow up here, but, the school system is very committed, the DOE here, and wants to make sure that every kid is respected and that every kid can feel safe in school. And they do commit money to that, and they commit money to trying to educate all of their staff, not just teachers and administrators and the counselors, but even the people who work in the lunchroom, anyone who's going to interact with kids. And I think parents need to remember, as advocates for their kids, that they need to feel like their kid's going to be respected and safe at school. That's a school's job, is to create a safe environment for learning, and that they have every right to have conversations with the principal or with the counselors at the school. What are you going to do to make sure that my kid is safe?
Yeah. That also just reminds me of another point about even just going beyond respect and beyond kind of the bare minimum of being able to survive in a school, but also seeing yourself represented in what it's teaching. I've had the privilege to work on rewriting courses to make them LGBTQ plus inclusive. And even if you're a parent at the start of the year, going through your kid's syllabus to just see how many books have LGBTQ plus characters, or how many lessons are LGBTQ plus, and especially for people of color, LGBTQ plus lessons that feature people of color. Because you will not find a lot. And I think that's one of the best ways that schools can improve and that parents can also supplement education, is about talking about those experiences, because it balances out the way kids see themselves. We often get a really negative portrayal of what it is to grow up LGBTQ plus. And so seeing instances both in history and in literature of that being something empowering, or of the community being resilient, can be so important. Even doing things like donating to the school library books about being LGBTQ plus, or asking them for resources, because many public libraries and many school libraries will have a list on hand. I think that can also be a really effective way to make sure that kids aren't just surviving, but also feeling as though they're represented and that they can make change as well.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about this a bit when we were preparing for this call, but if you look at students of color in general in schools, well, schools aren't necessarily the safest places for them either. Generally speaking, that they can receive harsher punishments, they can face criminalization for kind of non-social norm behavior. That's only exacerbated when kids of color are also queer kids of color. Could you speak to any of their experiences from some of the kids you've worked with, some of the kids from your school, and kind of how they're dealing with this whole topic in general, specifically from their situation?
I think it's been interesting recently, especially around kind of the growth or the normalization really of Black Lives Matter in mainstream consciousness, that it's both created this rallying cry for activists that I'm starting to see a greater social understanding of the idea of Black trans lives also mattering and how important they are to our community. And I've loved to see that, especially during this Pride Month. But also I think it's had a mental health impact that's taxing. I can go through social media and see probably about maybe 100, 200 people posting about how the average lifespan for Black trans individuals is 35 years. And while it's a fact, it's something that it's worth spreading awareness about, it's something that we need to know and fix. It also can just be so both dehumanizing and also so harmful to the consciousness of people who are Black and trans. And I think right now more than ever, there is a mental health need. We see that in therapy, 86% of therapists are white. And there isn't a lot of access to therapists of color who can understand that experience. And so that's another thing that needs to be greatly expanded, and it's kind of adding to this mental health problem. And so even if you're able to get support, it doesn't always mean that support will understand where you're coming from or be effective. And so while I've loved to see what has happened with activism and with more inclusion and more intersectionality in the LGBTQ plus community, I think we have a long way to go in making both services and solutions accessible.
Julie, are you there with us? I believe you might be muted.
Yes, I just responded.
Oh, there you go.
Probably my audio, apparently.
Well, some of our audience members are curious. Again, these are some big issues that are impacting queer youth. Are there any organizations out there that moms, dads, parents, family members can learn more about or join in order to be better advocates for their kids and for other LGBTQ plus students?
Yes. Well, there's the It Gets Better project, of course, which is just a fabulous resource. No, seriously, I think hearing our stories and hearing other people's stories are really important to understand what kids are facing and how it's not all just LGBTQ plus stories. It's advocates and allies and supporters. And your glossary is amazing. I use it all the time, for people to understand the language. And as a cisgender person, I know that, meaning that I identify with the gender that I was assigned at birth, but that not everyone knows what that means. I actually thought until like 6 years ago that it meant I was straight, but that wasn't it. So your glossary is amazing. And then there's PFLAG, which is a parent support organization. And there are 400 chapters around the country. And I know that they work within schools. They have a Safe Schools program where they go in and talk with teachers and faculty and staff and do professional development programs and also talk to the kids, where someone who's LGBTQ or a parent like myself will come in and share our stories with the kids. So I'd suggest finding a chapter in your city or your location. There's probably is one. And then there's also chat support through PFLAG as well.
Yeah. If I could just kind of add on to that briefly, I think one of the best programs out there is Glisten, which does a lot of curriculum access and a lot of LGBTQ plus additions to longstanding curriculums. And you don't necessarily have to be in the classroom, but these can just be good resources for parents to kind of understand what the context is around being LGBTQ plus. There are also a lot of different resources there to help kids start LGBTQ plus advocacy clubs in their school, if that's something that they feel safe doing or passionate about. And I think that's a really great way and kind of this great almost gift to a family that they can have both this idea of the context surrounding their kid, these educational lessons, and also resources about how to make solutions that are youth driven.
Yeah, that's so important. And I know that the GSA, which used to be called the Gay Straight Alliance, and now it's just a gender and sexuality club, that they offer a lot of resources. And I know that Justin, It Gets Better project's working in schools too, providing a lot of media guides and giving teachers resources for media that can help bring education into the classroom. And I know that there's study guides that parents are able to download as well, so they can have discussions with their kids. Watching a movie together can be really enlightening and helpful.
Well, Glisten, that organization that Uma mentioned, GLSEN, they released a report a few years back that said that in order for LGBTQ students to thrive at school, they need at least 4 things. They need supportive policies. They need supportive educators. They need inclusive curriculum, and they need a GSA or some sort of club or alliance for LGBTQ plus youth. When we saw that report as an organization, we took it very seriously, and we said, well, where can we help? And it was that inclusive curriculum piece where we knew we had an opportunity. So yes, if you go to itgetsbetter.org/education, you can find a ton of materials that make it easy to introduce It Gets Better stories into a classroom as well as other community settings. So it's kind of building that bridge to help create that inclusive curriculum in the first place, which, Uma, you've had a big hand in creating in Maryland. Have there been some major challenges, or what were some of the challenges in trying to get that enacted?
Oh, yeah. So many. I think it's been like LGBTQ plus history itself. It's been a story of struggle and of persistence throughout that. And so I think what really we've seen was that this was a course that was created by students for students. Unlike a lot of courses we commonly see as electives and curriculum inclusion, it was something that really was driven from the start by students, approaching their elected officials, approaching school boards and saying, this is something we need. We don't see ourselves. I've never read a book in class with an LGBTQ plus person. I haven't received access to anything about my community except maybe a talk in a health class that told me something that might not be true or might be misinformative. And so if you want to protect me and you want to make me feel like a valuable part of your community, you need to show me as one. And so that was something really powerful that led this to be created, and with a lot of student writers. And so we currently have an equal ratio of student writers to teachers and activists who are writing the course. It has opportunities in it for students to even develop their own advocacy skills in the classroom. One of the things I'm excited about is youth doing kind of a capstone project about how they can change their own school's culture around being LGBTQ+, and how they can highlight that towards the end of the year. Things about knowing your rights, and also historical aspects about being part of something bigger and understanding the connections between being LGBTQ+ or homophobia and aspects of racism or colonialism or ableism, and how these different things kind of compound together. The legal history in being LGBTQ+ in the US, and just so many different things that even if you're not LGBTQ+, are worth knowing about. And at the time when it was first something proposed and it was first enacted, it did get a lot of hate online from students themselves who said, I will hurt anyone who takes this course. Like, I will single them out. And which made us have to kind of look back and see how we can make this an even safer space than we already thought it was. And then also even just adults in our community, or adults who were not even part of this community, saying, and when I say community, I mean district or area, not the LGBTQ+ community, of course, saying this isn't something necessary, this is a waste of our taxpayer dollars, kids can find this online, or gay kids don't need this, like they're messed up inherently. And so we really had to, I think it kind of showed the need for this course and the need for other districts to make this course. Honestly, a lot of the homophobic pushback was counterintuitive, because it made it even clear that we have an issue of intolerance, we have an issue of exclusion, and the thing that's going to fix that is education. And so while there was a lot of hate, I think it was just, we already got it passed, and I think it just added the clarity of this being something necessary.
And Uma, I have to applaud you on that work. As you said, there's nothing wrong with LGBTQ youth, but there are some things wrong with the ways in which society treats them. And we could do a much better job at serving students and preparing them for their futures, as you're doing in your school district. And Julie, as you're doing as a mom right there in New York City with Harry. Thank you both so much for coming and joining this conversation. I would love to facilitate hours-long conversations with you on these subjects, but our time is up. But thank you for sharing your stories and your insights, and of course to Mayor Brown for giving us this space.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question for Laureen.
I'm here.
Laureen, speaking mom to mom now. After hearing these stories and listening to the conversation, I'm wondering what you would tell your own kids and others about what you and American Express are doing to make sure that these kids have a safe and healthy work environment.
That's a great question.
And just what you're doing right now, actually, and for your colleagues currently.
Okay. So first, Julie, I need to meet Harry. I'm inspired. And Uma, if you ever want a job when you get your law degree, I hope you will call Amex. You're welcome at the company.
Sorry, she's taken. Sorry, Laureen.
I know. So Mayor Brown will fight us. But anyway, first thing, and this is consistent with what Justin was saying. You need to feel like the company is going to have your back, because there, as Uma said, there are performance gaps because individuals in these communities face other challenges. And so you need to make sure that when you look at a company and you think about working there, you can see evidence that the company is sincerely committed to the success of all colleagues, including members of the LGBTQ plus community. So how do you know that? Well, do they have a resource network of employees that support one another? Like Amex has had one. We established our Pride Network in 1995. So we've been long at this. We have 14 chapters in 10 countries around the globe. And so one of the things we realize is that every country and every employee is in every location and leader is in a different journey. And so we've had to put a stake in the ground. So what else should they look for? Are the benefits equal for same-sex couples to heterosexual couples? Can you take the same kind of parental leave if you adopt or have a child, if you're in a same-sex couple relationship? Do they have benefits that support transition surgery, which is a very good way of seeing whether the company truly gets it? Do you look up and can you see individuals in leadership positions in the company like we have at American Express that are members of this community and out, right? How many individuals in the company are out and what kind of jobs and variety do they have? Do the leaders feel comfortable asking them what they did that weekend? Where did they go? Do the leaders actually engage them like they do heterosexual colleagues? These are all like small examples, but they're very, very important. Do they show examples of LGBTQ members in their advertisements? You know, there's so many things to look at, but inclusion means action. It means programs, it means conversation, it means resource groups, it means healthcare benefits. So I hope that answers your question, Julie, but those are just a few things.
It does. It's so good to hear. I mean, it's really, you know, now's the time for leaders to really be showing, leaders like you and others to be showing and demonstrating who they are, because people want to feel safe. They want to feel like they don't have to hide anything at work, and that they can just be themselves and be respected and be able to contribute at the highest level to a company like yours and Meyer Brown.
They should have no barriers.
Yeah, and Julie, I'm gonna pile on here to something Laureen said when Uma was talking about an achievement gap in school for LGBTQ plus students. I'm afraid that doesn't end with school. It happens at work also, and that's something that Laureen brought out. And we've had a lot of training at Mayer Brown, as I know has happened at American Express. Also, law firms and probably American Express also, there's a blanket called diversity and inclusion, and we have a lot of resources and we have a lot of energy around it. But diversity and inclusion are two different things. So at least in our world, diversity means how do you stack up in terms of the it's more than this, but the numbers of diverse lawyers, and that's not inclusion. Inclusion is exactly what Laureen said, which is, are the diverse lawyers succeeding? Are the diverse lawyers achieving? It's not that different than high school. The more you go on in life, you realize it's all the same, and it's an achievement gap that if you don't do things to make people feel safe to achieve, and if you don't actively remove barriers to that achievement, it's not going to work. And something that's very important is for LGBTQ plus individuals in the firm or in the company to see that there are leaders in the firm or the company who are out. I completely agree with that. We have an 8-person global management committee that I have the privilege to be the chair of. And one of my mentors, when I first came on to that committee before I was chair, it was an LGBTQ plus man who actually hosted our first stop on our virtual Pride Parade. And not only was he able to bring the perspective of an LGBTQ plus individual to bear in the decision making, but it was an inspiration to not only LGBTQ plus people in the firm, but also to me. And so that's what inclusion looks like, which is different than diversity.
Yeah.
One of our audience members just said, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance.
Indeed. Indeed.
I like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a clear and good comparison to make. And it's such a good metaphor for it. And actually, Paul, I wanted to ask you another question that's about kind of the flip side of this, of looking beyond kind of the internal of a company and into the external, because you do work at one of the world's biggest law firms. And we've seen during Pride Month that so many firms and companies want to show their commitment to the LGBTQ plus community, which is great. And they want to show their youth inclusivity and their interest in helping LGBTQ plus youth. And so I wonder, what role can global law firms, in your opinion, take to play in sustainably and effectively empowering LGBTQ plus youth?
That is a great question. So I'll start with a little bit of theory. And of course, the phone rings right now. We have 7 core values in our law firm that are on the first page of our global strategy. And that doesn't really distinguish us from probably other large law firms. But one of those is that we embrace the idea that we have an obligation, not just the ability, but also the obligation to make a difference in the communities where we live and work. Being a lawyer has, and working for a large law firm has a lot of privilege to it, and I don't mean that in a haughty sense. I mean that it's a position in society that that in the world order is something that people work very hard to achieve by going to university and going to law school and coming to work at a large law firm. And it has to be a core principle that with that privilege comes a great responsibility, because the law is a powerful tool. I spoke very quickly at the beginning about our work in defeating the Defense of Marriage Act and about our work in supporting the right, supporting same-sex marriage and those types of things. That's hardcore law, right? That's hardcore law. That's because we have a great appellate and Supreme Court practice. But I'm not a Supreme Court and an appellate lawyer. I'm a corporate lawyer. So I can't really get involved in the niceties of trying to get the Supreme Court to support same-sex marriage. So we have really a pretty well-organized set of initiatives that can make a difference and have made a difference in the lives of LGBTQ plus youth as part of our commitment to make a difference in the communities where we live and work. And I'm going to go through a couple examples. You may remember last year that the administration in Washington issued a rule. They seem to be big on issuing rules this way. A rule that allowed healthcare workers to deny services to patients on the grounds of religious or moral beliefs. And if an institution denied that quote unquote right to healthcare workers, then they can lose their federal funding, which is really a mortal blow to most healthcare institutions. And that was affecting children as well as it was affecting adults. And we were able to team with Lambda Legal and Americans United for the Separation of Church and State and the Center for Reproductive Rights, and we were able to organize all those and get a federal judge to say that this denial of care rule is unconstitutional, and that ruling was challenged and it withstood challenge. So. Score one for the good guys on that, right? That's one example of a way to make a difference at a grassroots level. In the area of immigration, there's something called special immigrant juvenile status that you may be aware of, where individuals, LGBTQ plus youth who are fleeing violence or persecution, are allowed to apply for that status to come into the U.S. in a legal way. And the whole assault on immigration law is closely tied in with that. And we've been able to have a number of victories on behalf of LGBTQ plus youth applying for that status. That doesn't get a lot of headlines the way a Supreme Court ruling does, but it makes a very real difference in the lives of people. There's a process for applying for petitions to change your name or your gender marker. Something that we have a project that we assist with that Laureen and I were discussing yesterday, and we have a number of our lawyers, and you don't have to be a fancy Supreme Court litigator to do this. A number of our staff and our paralegals, in addition to our lawyers, have said it's among the most rewarding things that they're able to do, to be able to help people with that. It doesn't take a ton of time. It's not a months-long process, but it's not something that an LGBTQ plus youth or adult is really comfortable navigating without the help of somebody who's trained in the law. So those are some projects that come to mind as you asked the question. It's the point I'm trying to make is it's not always the fancy legal work that changes laws that can make a difference. That can make a difference in the lives of LGBTQ plus youth. I also, we do think of our diversity and inclusion initiatives at the firm as having an external piece and an internal piece. And it's really important that while we are pursuing these external initiatives, that we're also true to our internal mission to create an environment where everybody's allowed to achieve to his or her talent, regardless of their status. And it can be ethnic, but it's also LGBTQ plus or not. And we keep track of it, and we make sure that we have opportunities for advancement for everybody in the firm, and we have to do those at the same time. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think what I love to hear also at the start, when you kind of mentioned the privilege and the power that comes with corporate law and with major law firms, and the idea of using that privilege effectively and using it for something kind of beyond the organization and into the external was something great to hear. And I think, kind of like I said in the question about the importance of doing things that are sustainable. And like you said, it isn't always the fancy legal cases, but the things that really power it at the person-to-person level and at the very sustainable level are those name changes, and are those kind of what are seemingly minor points of advocacy, but could be life or death for other people. And so I think that's a great and a really kind of comprehensive answer to that question, a comprehensive solution to kind of a firm's duty to the rest of society.
So, Tim, can you jump to the slide that has our sort of pro bono opportunities there? Thanks a lot. We part of the and part of the challenge is to organize and marshal the energy to try to make a difference. And because we have to, both within and outside of Mayor Brown, we have to help people to figure out how best to use their energies and their enthusiasm to try to make a change. And we have a variety of organizations that we've identified. And we can get to that piece, but Laureen, you and I spoke about some organizations that we have a common interest in, where we can try to team up and make 1 + 1 = 3 between Mayor Brown and American Express.
Yeah, we're really looking forward to that. So with the work of my team, Richard Quinones, Daron Beery, and Erin McConnell, and all the work we've done to support immigration activities the past couple of years, there's 2 areas in particular we want to double down on. One, of course, is the name change, which is easy for all of our staff to participate in. And the other area is helping LGBTQ plus individuals who are seeking asylum in the United States achieve that through immigration legal support. It's near and dear to our heart. We know how difficult it is in other countries to be a member of this community. And so the first organization we're going to partner with you on supporting over the next 2 years is the National Immigrant Justice Center, and the work they're doing to support asylum seekers and other immigration matters for this community. And then the second organization that our law department at American Express is going to partner with you to support is the Legal Services of New York City organization, which does the same thing here locally. So we're very much looking forward to that. It's a call to action, and we're pretty excited about it. And we appreciate Mayor Brown joining with us on that.
And you have my commitment that we will make 1 + 1 = 4. How about not 3? So we'll
or 5.
We really look forward to joining together to do that. So thanks, Laureen, for that commitment, and we share it, and we're on record now as sharing it, which is great.
That's right. That's right.
So for
go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, please go ahead, Paul.
Tim, I was just going to say on the screen now, do you want to go to that last slide where we can solicit help from our very patient and wonderful audience here, participants? So if I don't know if you've got up on the screen the list of organizations, but if you'd like to send an email to mbpride@mayorbrown.com and you want to be contacted and enlisted in the fight, we will contact you and be in touch. The other way to do that is you can do it in the on-screen chat box, but I don't know how to use it, so I'm not going to ask you to use it. So, but in the on-screen chat box, you can also sign up there. But mbpride@mayorbrown.com. Just shoot an email when you have time or right now, saying that you're interested in getting involved in one of these organizations, so we can make the world a better place for people like Harry and Uma. And live out our commitment here. We wanted to make that opportunity to be available. And before I'm done with my microphone here, I want to thank Justin and the It Gets Better Project. I want to thank Julie and Uma. This has been, and I want to thank Laureen. This has been a phenomenal, it's supposed to be an hour, it's an hour 13, it's just rounding error. I want to thank everybody for the incredible turnout for this and the energy here. And Tim, your virtual Pride Parade idea is coming to life on this 4th stop again. So congrats to you and thank you to you.
Thank you, Paul. And again, on your screen, everyone, are the different options for completing a survey to select a pro bono project that you want to work on with Mayor Brown attorneys and American Express. And again, we thank everyone for their time today. On your screen, you'll see the kind of last and final stop on the Pride Parade coming up early next week on Monday. Feel free to register and hear from both Lambda Legal and our appellate lawyers at Mayor Brown a little bit about the Title VII cases that thankfully have come down in favor of LGBTQ people like me, Justin, and Uma today, and Laureen's brother and daughter. We're excited to have that conversation about what it means for all of us. So thank you, everyone, for your time today, and have a lovely, lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.